Hello everyone, Lawrence Hugo here from Credit Mediation Service. I hope you're well. So part one of this part two series, part one was about 5 things not to say or do with a debt collector. And it seems rather obvious that part two has got to be 5 things to say or do with a debt collector. What to say, what not to say, what to say. And the idea of handling a debt collection call in the right way is to maximize your financial return. And it could save you thousands or even hundreds of thousands if it's handled in the right way. If you think I'm exaggerating, trust me, I'm not. There's a couple of points in these 5 steps that if it's not taken under the correct circumstances, I know would have cost our clients hundreds of thousands of dollars if these particular points were not taken. So it's very, very, very important. And these points might surprise you. The first one wouldn't surprise you. The first thing, and probably one of the more important things, is be empathetic to the debt collector. I mentioned this in part one. When you're expressing empathy and you're empathic with the debt collector, what you're doing is you're working with them for a solution, and that's what their aim is as well. Now they're not out to get you personally; they just want to get this bill paid. And if you work with them, then they're going to work with you. And if you are flexible, they'll be flexible as well. And just remember, these are just normal people, just like you and I. And these people are just trying to do their job. It's not an overly pleasant job, and they've got families to feed as well. And so if there's a heightened level of empathy, then that'll go a long way. And that's a true maxim for everything in life. If you're empathetic towards everyone in your life, then life's going to be a lot easier, and no less with debt collectors. Okay, that's number one. Number two, this is really important, this one. Ask when an account goes to when an account goes to a debt collection agency. A lot of these debts that they're collecting on are fairly aged, and the payments haven't been made for some time. So you might have a bank with an account with ANZ Bank. You haven't paid the credit card for a few years, maybe 5 years or 4 years or 6. You don't quite remember. It's kind of disappeared into the ether. Then you get a phone call out of the blue from a debt collection agency. They haven't forgotten about it, and so it's just taken them a while to get to you. First question to ask them, very, very important. What was the date of my last payment? Now, why would you ask that? The reason why you ask it is this account might be statute barred. Now, before I go any further, this clip is not legal advice, nor is it financial advice. Okay, it's debt advice. Now, what is statute barred? Statute barred relates to the statute barred laws. Now, we work with clients and debt collection agencies around statute barred debts. But if you have any concerns about the statute barred laws, and if your debt's statute barred, contact a lawyer and seek some guidance. Now, with the statute barred law is that if you don't pay, and it changes from state to state, territory to territory, but if you don't pay broadly, if you don't pay your debt for 6 years, then it becomes statute barred and you no longer have to pay it, and the debt collection agency is no longer allowed to collect on it. And there's around the edges on that time frame and circumstances it changes from state to state. But as soon as you make a payment, it resets the debt. So if you've got 5.5 years in and you've got 6 months to go before it's statute barred, you make a payment, it resets the clock. Or you admit the debt, it resets the clock. Or if the debt collection agency litigates against you, then it resets the clock to 12 years. Very broadly. And so the reason why you want to ask the debt collection agency, the first question is, when did I make my last payment? Phone call. When did I make my last payment? They're going to go back, because that won't be immediately obvious to them. They'll go back and they'll say, oh, it was 4 years and 6 months ago. Okay, all right. So you're a year and a half before your statute barred. And from that point, you're informed. And you can make the decision at that point to say, look, I'm going to hold off for the time being. Can you give me a few months to think about it and go from there? And maybe you want to take the chance and see through that statute barred until statute barred period. But it's a big chance because the agency might take litigation. Or you might say, okay, thanks very much. I gave it a shot. I'll start making repayments. So I'm going to do another clip on the statute barred laws in much, much more detail at a later point. But suffice it to say that it is critical for you to ask that question to know at the very least whether you are statute barred or not. And that has saved a lot of clients hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars just by asking that simple question. Number 3, ask for the copies of the statements and the contracts. Now, why would you do that? You're with a debt collection agency. You signed a contract, maybe 20 years ago, but do they know? And if they can't produce the copies of the contracts, it doesn't mean you don't owe the money, because the debt is because the existence of the debt would suggest that the signed contracts are implied that they do exist somewhere, even though they might not be available. The fact that they can produce statements showing spending patterns on the cards and maintaining the repayments would suggest that debt is owed. So, but by asking for those statements and for the contracts, particularly if you're going to put in a dispute of some kind, or if you feel pressured by the debt collector, unjustified pressure, then you can respond by asking for this information. And by asking for this information, you're putting them on the defensive, and they have to, by law, comply with your request. And by producing that information, or whether they can't produce, if they can't produce that information, it muddies the water on the liability. It's not a slam dunk. You're still liable, but it just muddies the water, makes it less certain, and that might give you the morale upper ground to secure a better figure with the debt collection agency. And the other reason why I ask for the original contracts is, what if they're bad contracts? What if upon examining you felt that the lender gave you the money illegally? What if there's a compliance issue and you might want to get a lawyer to look at the contracts? You never know. The fourth thing to think about, fourth thing to say to a debt collector is you nominate a figure to pay them. And I touched on this in the last video, where one thing you don't say is you ask them, how much do you want me to pay? And you don't do that. Rather, the fourth thing to say is you nominate how much you can afford to pay. So you're talking to the debt collector will want you to pay the maximum amount each month, if not the whole payout. And you're not going to play that game. No. So you can afford to pay, for example, $300 a month to pay off a $5,000 credit card with the debt collection agency. But you don't nominate $300 a month, you nominate half that, $150 a month. And if you do that, you know that you can afford it. And even in the bad months where you've got extra bills, you can still afford to maintain the repayments. Because if you default on the agreement, then the debt collection agency can litigate against you. Not generally that they will, if there's just one default. Generally, they'll respond by with litigation if there's constant defaults and they can't reach you, and so then they'll consider a litigation option. But you can pay consistently at $150 a month, for example, half of what you can afford to pay. That's the Goldilocks zone in the payment arrangement that you set up with the debt collection agency. The fifth thing to say to a debt collector, and this is also quite important and most people miss, and that is, okay, Mr. Debt Collector, we've come to an agreement on paying $150 a month. I'll even agree to do a direct debit because they love direct debits. They love it for obvious reasons. I'll do a direct debit. This is the agreement. I'll pay $150 a month. There's not going to be any defaults. I'll do a direct debit. But what I want in return is a permanent freeze on the interest. They can do that, yes. And if they've placed a default on the credit report, the removal of the default. And they can do that if it's placed there incorrectly. So they want something from you, well, you grab something back from them. And sometimes a debt collector might respond by saying, Look, we can put a permanent interest block on it, but we can't remove the default because we think it was placed there correctly. And you might respond by saying, well, I can give an extra $500 or $1,000 if you can do that, but I have to borrow the money from somewhere. And so they might respond favorably, or they might say, yes, we have to remove the default because it's placed there incorrectly, but we're not going to stop interest. And so you might respond with, that carrot, that teaser, $1,000, and you stop that interest, because this is really important, guys. And the reason why it's important is this. A lot of clients will have $20, $30, $40, $50,000 debts with a debt collection agency, and they're charging like a judgment interest rate, say 12%, 13%, or the full interest rate of the original loan, which could be 18% or 22%, or if it's a business loan, like 30%. How on earth are you going to pay that debt off? If they're charging 30% interest or 20% interest, how are you going to do that when you're paying $150 a month or even $500 a month? So you're going to be chasing your tail for years and years and years, and it's going to be a bane on you and your family. So the optimal approach would be is you bargain with them. You want me to pay $150 a month or $500 a month or what have you, and I'll do it a direct debit. But we need the interest block and we need the default removed. You want something, I want something, let's exchange. And 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, it works really well. So they're the 5 things you ought to do with a debt collector. Empathy, really important. Ask for the date of the last payment. Ask for the copies of the contracts and the statements. You nominate the arrangement that you can afford, don't allow them to nominate. And of course, ask for interest-free and the removal of the default. Doesn't always work, but generally it does if you're super, super nice to them and highly empathic. All right, guys. Well, if you have any questions or concerns, give us a call, 1300 490 030, or you reach out to us on w.creditmediation.com.au if you've got a problem with a debt that you need dealt with, or have a client who has a debt that needs dealt with. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.